Ricquel, march. Color guard, halt. Present, colors.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hail as the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the hope of the brave?
Carry. Ready, cut. Counter march, march. Color guard, halt. Pose, colors. Left, face. Forward, march.
You may be seated. I apologize that in the chaos I forgot to ask somebody if they would open us up in prayer. So I guess that's going to be me since I'm at the mic. Heavenly Father, we thank you for the ability to meet here tonight. We thank you for the fellowship and the dear friends that have traveled here. It says in your word that if two or more are gathered together in your name, that you are there with us. God, we welcome your presence here, and we thank you for your gift. And just open up our hearts and minds to hear what you would have for us to receive this weekend. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
We had a music leader in line to come and do some stuff for us. He had a family emergency. So we're going to be doing this the old-fashioned way, and that means when your guitarist or your pianist is out sick at church, you go to YouTube for some worship music. So if you don't mind, we're going to do that this weekend. Bob, you can go ahead and play whenever you're ready. It's not nearly as polished as I imagined it was going to be in my head when we were planning this, but then you remember the disappointment.
In your dog's world. Number one, their paws smell like corn chips. You see, the scent is often due to the accumulation of yeast.
Let me stay by your guiding light all through my 'Cause you are waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness, my God, that is who you are. Oh, you are waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness, my God, that is who you are. You are here, turning lives around. I worship you, I worship you. You are here, mending every heart. I worship you, I worship you. You are waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness, my God, that is who you are. Oh, you are waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness, my God, that is who you are. 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 Even when I don't see it, you're working. Even when I don't feel it, you're working. You never stop, you never stop working. You never stop, you never stop working. Even when I don't see it, you're working. Even when I don't feel it, you're working. You never stop, you never stop working. You never stop, you never stop working. Even when I don't see it, you're working. Even when I don't feel it, you're working. You never stop, you never stop working. You never stop, you never stop working. Even when I don't see it, you're working. Even when I don't feel it, you're working. You never stop, you never stop working. You never stop. 'Cause you are waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness, my God, that is who you are. Oh, you are waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness, my God, that is who you are. 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 Sing wide, all ye heavens, let the praise go up as the walls come down. All creation, everything with breath, repeat the sound. All his children, clean hands, pure hearts. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see. It's grace. 'Twas grace that taught my heart to fear, and grace that grace appear. The hour I first believed. Sing my chains. My chains are gone. I've been set free. My God, my Savior has ransomed me. And like a flood.
Okay, today is June 1st. Please say your name and spell it. I'm God, G-O-D.
His mercy brings unending love, amazing grace, unending love, amazing grace.
All right. Thank you all again for being here. This is we've done a whole lot of conferences with Point Man over the years, but this is the first one that I've put louder. Okay. I can't hear from over here. Do this. We'll just do it this way. So we've done a lot of conferences in Point Man over the years, since it's been around since 1984. I was elected president 3 years ago, just shy of 3 years ago. My name is Marcus King. Most of you know me. We are streaming this live to Facebook right now to the corporate page, and this video will be migrated over to YouTube and possibly Rumble after this session is over with. So this is my first conference. Welcome to Oklahoma City, all of you. Thank you all for coming here. Things didn't work exactly as I had imagined that they would, but you know what? That's okay, because God still had a plan. He's still working this, and he was able to take it out of my hands and show me that this is the way that he wants to do it. So we're gonna run with it. Because how can I say no to that? We had several people from the Oklahoma City area, because Point Man is on the Oklahoma Veterans Council. Had several people lined up that were going to come in here to speak today. Only one of them showed up from that meeting. So I would like to introduce my friend Gary Brown with SleepSmartz. He's a part of the Veterans Council. He's got some information that he would like to talk about veteran suicide. So Gary, if you're ready.
Yep.
You want to hold it, or you want to put it in the seat? Put it in.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening. We're going to talk about a couple of the issues. Can everybody hear me all right?
No.
A little bit quiet.
No, you can't. Okay, how about now? Is that better? All right. You know, I have, my hearing's not all that great, but it certainly wasn't from the service. It's much worse. It was that rock and roll from the 60s and 70s, folks. Let me tell you, that will blow your ears out. And your parents' stereo, I might add. I'm going to make a thoroughly unremarkable statement, okay? Veterans who are seriously considering suicide can't sleep, okay? Now, we all know this intuitively, but let me tell you about a research study from 2020 in the U.S. Army that showed that veterans who have been diagnosed with chronic insomnia are 300% more likely to think about death and think about suicide. 300%. Let me ask you all a question. How many of you have ever struggled with insomnia? Well, I could raise my hand as high as any of you. I struggled with it for 23 years, took Ambien for 13 years, and folks, I can tell you right now that if you will Google insomnia is hell, you're going to get over 7 million hits, all right? And any of you who have struggled with insomnia night after night understand that completely. How many of you all relate to the feeling of having not gotten good sleep? And by that what I mean is you wake up at 3 a.m., 3:30, whatever, day after day, until during the day, you think about sleep a lot, okay? Anybody ever been there? Well, I have. I'll tell you, it's a really sad thing. So you would think, obviously, that DoD is really focused on the interrelationship between insomnia and suicide, right? Well, I didn't bring this up here, but you couldn't see it anyway. I have a pie chart of all of the DoD suicide prevention programs. There's about 12 of them. And they're all very good programs, very good programs. Guess what's missing? Anything about sleep, okay? Even though the relationship between sleep and suicidal thoughts is so close. Well, we are going to change that. My company, SleepSmartz, in 2020, produced 84 sleep sessions for those who are addicted to opioid, alcohol, and meth, all right? Because when a substance user, when an addict is in recovery, their brain chemistry is changing and insomnia goes off the charts, all right? They can't sleep. Well, what do you think is the biggest temptation for an opioid addict who wakes up at 3 a.m., go to the bathroom, gets back in bed, and they can't sleep, and they're laying there miserable again, and they've been laying there miserable every night for weeks? What do you think their biggest temptation is? We're talking about an opioid addict.
More.
Take a pill. Because I'll tell you this, you guys, opioids will put you to sleep. They screw up your sleep cycle, but you know what? For somebody laying there miserable in the darkness of their own bedroom or in a recovery center, sometimes they just think, I don't want to be miserable anymore. I'm going to go to sleep. Even if they wake up groggy, even if all of that, okay? Even if they relapse, all right? So when we finished these sleep sessions, and I'll explain what a sleep session is in a minute, one of our team members, Lieutenant Colonel Ray Baker, who's 20 years Air Force and has a sober living house for veterans in Edmond, he said, Gary, we have to apply this technology to veterans who are struggling with suicide. We have to do it. And after looking at the stats, the research, man, I was all in. I was completely all in. So we're going to produce this series of sleep sessions. Now let me give you a little overview as to what a sleep session is, all right? Sleep sessions, which are audio, obviously they're not video because you're trying to go to sleep, right? They're audio sessions that combine proven relaxation techniques with principles for overcoming a particular condition, all right? Now, what are proven relaxation techniques? All of you all are familiar with these. Deep breathing techniques, all right? Progressive muscle relaxation, where you feel your arms getting very heavy, all right? There are a lot of them, right? Imagining yourself in a very peaceful scenario. Like, for example, you're laying on the beach in a hammock that's gently swaying, okay? You hear the ocean surf. You hear the seagulls, all right? I'm going to put you guys to sleep, I promise, all right? You mix all of that together with this terrific meditation music that is everywhere. And I know a lot of you have heard it. It's extremely relaxing. And you always begin with relaxation, and you transition into about 5 to 7 minutes of a very encouraging message that helps a person overcome a particular condition. And then you always end the sleep session with a lot of relaxation, all right? Because obviously, what's the point? It's to help someone relax himself to sleep. But I can tell you this, the relaxation principles are very, very powerful. In fact, in research, they've been shown to be as powerful as any sleep medication, all right? But without the side effects, okay? So, here's a question. Do we have the capability to do this? Well, I've already mentioned to you that under the leadership of our Chief Science Officer, Dr. Lowell Robertson, who is an MD in addiction medicine, he actually supervised the production of the sleep sessions for substance abuse. What we're going to do for veterans is this. We're going to partner with a veteran treatment center that already successfully helps veterans overcome suicidal ideation, all right? And we're going to take their principles and we're going to produce a series of sleep sessions from those principles. Now, let me say one quick thing. And this is, I'm going to get into the weeds here for a second, but I promise only for a second. You don't try to provide a lot of information at 3 a.m. because your brain works very differently at 3 p.m. than it does at 3 a.m. All right? At 3 a.m., you can only focus on one thing, really. Your brain waves are literally going a lot slower. So, if there's 12 major principles for overcoming suicidal ideation, we will have 12 sleep sessions, all right? There are several really good veteran treatment centers, national veteran treatment centers, that help veterans overcome suicidal ideation. And one of those organizations is represented here at this conference, this Reboot Recovery. And Chris, I haven't met you yet, but if you're here, all right, there you are. You're on our list to talk to when we get ready to produce these because you have a great track record. I mean, I'm just telling you, you're a great track record. And by the way, most of the veteran treatment centers around the country that successfully help veterans overcome suicidal thoughts have a commonality. And that is that they incorporate Christian principles into their therapy, all right? Now, I want you to think about this for a second. When a veteran is on the edge, they're so depressed, they don't want to wake up the next day, all right? And I know that you all have known people like this, all right? They're not going to be helped by a glib phrase or some little pithy saying, all right? But I tell you what will help them, and that is the power of God. That will help them. That will give them hope, all right? So we're looking at, as I said, 6 or 7 organizations. And again, the good ones incorporate Christian principles into their therapy. So to kind of sum this up, we're going to do something that's revolutionary. We're going to do something medications can't do. We're going to help a veteran drift off to sleep while meditating on principles that will actually change the way they think about their life and give them hope for living the next day, all right? And the other thing, let me say one other thing. This is a phone, all right? Guess what? This is the delivery mechanism, all right? Sometimes a veteran at 3:30 in the morning, they need to talk to a real person, okay? A sleep session's great, but they need to talk to somebody real in order to save their life. We're gonna have a button that they can push and immediately call the treatment center to talk to somebody real, all right? And we'll probably, although this is in discussion, put a button where they can call the 988 Veteran Suicide Hotline, all right? But we want to be able to put them in touch with somebody at that time if they need it, okay? And that's why we want to work closely with the Veteran Treatment Center, because we want to overwhelm this treatment center with veterans who they can save, all right? That's the big picture. This also solves a problem that DoD has with every one of their other strategies, okay? There's a little truth here that all of you know, and that is, or most of you know anyway, and the veterans who struggle with suicidal thoughts don't want anyone else to know. Okay, you know why that is. I know you guys know why that is. It's because they think it will negatively affect their service record. And guess what? They're right. And that's been the case, unfortunately. What that means, though, is that DoD suicide prevention programs that require identifying the veteran who struggles with these thoughts, by definition, can only help a small percentage of veterans. However, when someone listens to a sleep session on our app, number one, no one knows that you're listening to a sleep session, and no one knows which sleep session you're listening to. You can listen completely anonymously, which means we can reach all veterans, not just veterans who say, I have this problem. So I hope that's making sense. Our current app has 20,000 downloads. It's a quite honestly a terrible app. It's a very simple template app, which plays a sample of 10 generic sleep sessions. But we are currently in the funding stage of raising the amount that we need to finish our subscription app and produce the sleep sessions and some other things. Once we're funded, this will be ready in about 6 months. I want to tell you a heartbreaking story. Since January, I've been working with the legislature on getting funding from ARPA, the American Rescue Plan. And I was told by several legislators that this is one of the smallest requests for ARPA of all. And the legislators, the 6 legislators in the committee that we have been talking to, were really for it. I mean, they were like, we were really for it. But guess what? I just got word that pet projects have pushed us out. Probably.
Yes.
I mean, I am telling you all, we have the support of General Ben Robinson, General Rita Aragon, a lot of service organizations behind this. But you know what? Politics, unfortunately, is politics. That ain't over, though, because there are many agencies that have received ARPA dollars that we still are going to talk to. But you know what? If you would pray for us, that the Lord would give us the funding, which we need $294,000, all right? Pray for us, that God will give us the funding that we need to get this done, because we have to get it done. And give us your ideas, all right? If you know of corporate sponsors that might want to sponsor this, if you know of anything like that, get with me and let me know. Because I'll tell you something, you guys, this is too important. This is way too important to kick the can down the road, as I politely told our legislators. Listen, you guys, thank you so much for your attention. Appreciate it very much.
Let me ask you this. Is the screen distracting if we don't have anything on it right now? Nick, how's that working on the video? Have you got it zoomed in on me right now?
I got it zoomed in on you as much as I can.
You actually have it zoomed in on me?
Yes, I do.
Okay. Is it easier for the crowd if the screen is not illuminated in blue until it's needed, though? I'm asking for It's fine, run with it?
Fine.
Okay, we're doing it live. So up next I've got, and most of you have had the opportunity to interact with her and spend time with her, Ricquel Ivy. She has a foundation called Patriot Hope, and she has some things that she would like to share with you, with her knowledge. So, Ricquel, come on up.
Okay, I have a soft voice, so I might have to almost yell. Can you guys hear me?
No.
No. Okay. Is this better?
Yes, much better.
Okay. So, I just first of all want to say thank you for inviting me, and I've got a chance to talk to many of you and hear your stories or parts of your stories, and I kind of am a little bit overwhelmed right now. I feel like I'm in a room full of heroes who don't consider themselves heroes, and they want to help the next person, which is exactly the vision that I was given a few years ago. But I want to back up and give you a little bit of background before I say that. So in 1990, my mom's watching. Sorry, Mom. We got into this huge argument, and I was about ready to graduate high school, and I got mad, and don't ever make a decision like this when you're mad. I got in my car and I drove to the next town over, and I signed up for the service. And then the recruiter, she gave me this little sticker that said, "My daughter is a United States Marine." Put that in an envelope, and I sent it to my father's address. And about 3 days later, I got an irate phone call. So that is how I ended up in the Marine Corps, and I loved every minute of it, well, most of it. It was really hard transition when I got out, and I stayed at home and raised 2 sons who are both grown. One's married, and one just actually got out of the Air Force. And then I went back to school when my youngest was getting out of high school. And it was October of 2012, I believe. Kind of got this whole thing started. I was headed to the VA hospital in Claremore to volunteer. And on the way there, I passed this man in a wheelchair on the street. And I just heard this voice, you need to stop and talk to him. I'm not going to stop and talk to no man on the street that I don't know. No. So I kept driving. And before I got to the end of the street, it just wouldn't let go. So I turned around and I go back, and I met, he's still a really good friend today, my friend John. He is a double amputee from Vietnam, and it was friendly fire. And it took a long time for me to realize that he thought I was helping him, and I thought I didn't even, I realized he helped me more than I helped him. So the day after I met him, we had cattle at the time, and they were calving, and the coyotes were really bad, and our dog got in the thick of it trying to protect the cows, and she got kicked, and her leg had to be amputated, from here down. And so a couple of friends said, "Oh, well, let's put her in, we'll get her trained, and we'll be able to use her for, veterans coming home, their families, they can touch the dog and get used to an amputation and know what it's all about." before they see their loved one come home. So we did, and she made it through almost 2 phases of training and then decided she wasn't going to train him. And then she started having seizures. So at that point, we had already got this idea to serve veterans, and we called it Patriot Hope Missions, and I got all the groundwork set up. We did the 501(c)(3) thing and got everything. It's all legal and everything. And then my son went to college, and he's IT, and he found out that nonprofit organizations can get this free Google platform, and this is just what he tells me. I don't understand really any of the IT lingo, but then there's a thing called Azure that he did in college, and he set it all up, and it's all ready to go, and all I have to do is figure out how to put stuff on it. And then we've had like 4 different teams started, and when people figure out how much work it really is and all the rules and laws, and they just walk away. And so throughout the whole, I think we're really pushing 10 years now. I have 2 people still left that haven't given up. My son and my best friend since the 7th grade. So we just kind of been in a lull, and every time I get ready to shut it off and give up and say, I got to do something else. And my dear husband, I have to say thank you to him. He's put up with this, and we've put our own money into it and our own energy, and he has not once told me to give up. So I appreciate that from him. And then on the way here, well, before I came here, I talked to both of them, and I told them about Point Man. And anyway, since I've been here, I feel like I've been recruited, and they've both given me the blessing to say that they think Point Man is a good place for us to be, to start. So anyway, back to the dog and how it evolved. I was introduced to the coffee bunker in Tulsa through my VA doctor. And while I was there, a lot of the veterans, it's a place, it reminds me of USO, where you can just go and feel like you're in a safe place. You can talk to other veterans. They have resources to help you with jobs or, whatever. And all of the veterans there, by this time I'm in school and I'm trying to figure out what my major is going to be. And I wanted to help veterans, I knew that, and they just, all of them kind of steered me away from becoming a counselor because, they called it shrinking. We don't like to be shrinked. And I'm like, okay, so what do I do? So then I found out about coaching, and I thought, well, we could do that, and it's more like it's not so formal, and it just sounds kinder. And so we decided we were going to do that. Well, then while I was in school, the school that I was at decided to create a coaching committee, and we did research on what schools were best and what kind. And so we brought all of this information back to our instructors, and they created a class for us. So I actually took a couple of coaching classes. It was kind of fun that I helped do the research for. And then I failed my test the first time, and that was the first time I'd ever failed anything other than trying to get this nonprofit off the ground. And so we decided it's just been kind of sitting there in the background for now. But the vision that I was given, and I wasn't not asleep but not awake. I don't understand. I've never had anything like this happen. I've had 2 times in my life that I felt that I needed to pray for someone else, and at that exact time there was something very bad going on. But this one was Ezekiel 37. It was that vision where he's asking God, can these dry bones live? And since I was a child, this story has perplexed me. Like, I don't understand how does that happen? And in the vision, it was literally, I saw them start to rise up, but they were, when their clothes came, they were dressed in modern day uniform that I knew when I was in the service, and it was all 4 services, but their families came running from outside the picture. And then as they were united and got stronger, it was noticeable that they were standing taller and that they were ready. And then, this is the part that kills me, they started reaching down and pulling others up. Literally just pulling others up. And I had been fasting and praying because it was quickly approaching where I had to determine a major. And I just literally, it was like I woke up out of a dead sleep one night, and I sat up and I was like, oh, it's marriage and family. That would not have been something that I picked ever. My dream was to be a nurse. And every time I got, off the waiting list and ready to go into the program, we either got orders or I got pregnant. So I guess that wasn't God's will, and I didn't listen. And I struggle with that. I struggle with, like tonight, I prefer to have a PowerPoint or my notes and go down the list. And it was like, no, you're gonna just go and share the vision and trust me, and I will be there with you and I will take care of you. So that is, and I brought one thing that I need to read because it's a quote and I need to make sure that it's right. Part of what we decided to do, and I had a PowerPoint about this, but with the coaching, you know how when you go into the service, you go in with a buddy? A lot of us did. I didn't, but I had lots of friends that we went in on the buddy system. When you get out, you don't have that buddy. That buddy either stayed in or he didn't get out at the same time. And that brought me to realize that veterans or warriors, people in the military, are very mission oriented, and they, when they get out, there's like no direction, no vision, it took me a long time, and I was a stay-at-home mom when I got out. But the Proverbs 29:18, without a purpose, the people perish. And that stuck in my head. And if we could figure out a way to give veterans, when they're newly out, a vision, then maybe we would be better at transitioning back into the civilian world. And then this is, at the VA one day, I heard the director talking, and he was talking about moral injury. And I asked him, well, what is that? Never heard that word before, I never heard that term. And so he basically said, it's a soul injury in a nutshell. It's something that a doctor can't prescribe a pill for, a shrink can't fix it, only God can fix it. And I was like, wow, so every time I had anything free that I could do in college. I studied moral injury. I wrote papers on it. But when I first learned about it, the VA separated it from PTSD in 2009, and this is the definition that they gave it. Perpetrating, failing to prevent, bearing witness to, or learning about acts that transgress deeply held moral beliefs and expectations. And I don't know, sometimes the secular world, to me, they make things really complicated when it's really kind of simple. A soul injury would have been a whole lot easier to say. But I struggle with watching people in pain, and my heart just goes out to veterans and families, because that's one thing that I learned when I was in school and everybody that's part of, I think my failure is I've been listening to the wrong people in business or whatever. They tell me, oh, well, you can't do that because, that's not family oriented. Well, moral injury, if you have a person in your family that's suffering from a moral injury, the whole family is affected. And the dynamics change as the person heals, because they get better and families get better, and when our families get stronger, our communities get stronger, and as our communities get stronger, our state gets stronger, and our nation and our world, and so forth. So in school, they kind of separate it between the micro, which is individual family, the smaller units, and then the macro is on the world. And we used to call it, the trenches are considered the micro. And everybody always wants to work in the macro because they want to be famous or, and I love working with couples. And I guess that's where my heart is, because if you can fix the marriage or help someone heal to stay in the marriage, then the family stays together. And without the marriage, you don't have either one. You don't have a marriage and you don't have a family. My family, basically because of things that I had going on that I didn't even realize were going on, my family of creation, which was me and my ex-husband and my 2 children, we got divorced, and so it affects my kids to this day. I'm getting ready to be a grandma, and my son and daughter-in-law are having to schedule things because they're trying to keep us separated so we're not visiting at the same time. And it makes generational things harder also. So what we came up with for Patriot Hope Missions was basically, and Marcus is always telling me, it's very similar to what we do. And basically, in a nutshell, it was a coaching program with lessons and just little, I call them primers. And I started doing this with my group on Facebook. It's 40-Day Family Legacy. Every Wednesday I'm going on and I do like a primer. And it's not to be a lesson or tell you what to do or whatever. It's just a little lesson to get you primed, like you throw the primer on a car, or if you're a woman, sometimes you wear primer under your makeup. And then it's up to us or up to you what to do with that, because every family is different and every family might take it and paint a different picture or a different color, or they might even use a completely different template. Like, I use sewing a lot or quilting for my like canvas, but it might be paint or markers, or I remember one time in school we did tile that was all chopped up and you glued them on this thing to make a design. So each family is different and they need to be able to express themselves and heal in a way that they can, and each of us have a different hobby sometimes. So I try to put that out there to allow families to make their own choices and their own legacy. And that's why I called it that. So then I also, in school, I had this assignment that I thought was going to be easy because our family already did most of it. And that teacher, there was not a line on my paper that didn't have a red mark. And I was like, wow. So that's when we first created 40-Day Family. That we did that as a family to keep ourselves accountable. So, and I just pulled 40 out of a hat. I mean, I knew it was a biblical number. I didn't know the meaning or anything then. But for me, it was easier to separate it into a smaller time block and then take those goals and ideas that we had as a family and break them down and actually do them. And by the end of the semester, I got a really good grade on that paper, because that was, you know how sometimes you take a test at the beginning and then at the end you take the same test again to see how far you came. And my family came a long ways, and we still have a long ways to go. But as far as, I don't know, I look at veterans, and when we talk about all of these topics and issues that veterans have, especially moral injury, it's not, if you're not a veteran though, or you know, anybody can have a moral injury. So if you, how do I say this? When we have, a person has a moral injury, and since we're here, and I'm just going to use veterans as an example. When they're hurting and they're suffering, it's affecting all of their family. And it just hurts me, because if you were to look, if I looked out here and all of you were hurting, you all have sons, daughters, mothers, children, aunts, uncles, friends that hurt or are affected when you're hurting or need help. And it's not just one person. And every person that we help, every time that we help just one, it makes a difference for possibly hundreds of others. And so that is my hope. I feel like I've failed so far, because Marcus gave me a lot of credit at the beginning when he said, I have a foundation. Well, I guess we do have a foundation, but that's as far as we've gotten. So he's offered to allow me to work with Point Man Ministries and learn about, you know, the whole thing and do what I do. And I basically, like I said before, I had the blessing from my 2 people left to go ahead and do that. So we will be sticking around. And I just want to say one last thing to, I didn't know it was going to be streamed on the internet, but
I'm sorry.
if you're out there, and I know I put it out there to all my friends, and you know, if you're out there and you are hurting and you need help, just reach out to someone. Find the Point Man Ministry post, or I don't even know what they're called yet, in your area, and just reach out. These people, I have only known them for maybe 24 hours. And they've all been very encouraging and helpful, and they want to help people. And if they can help you, what can you do for someone else if you're if you're healthy and whole and made well? And for some of us, and I'm talking to me here, we are stubborn and afraid and scared, and we just have to work through it. And you just got to take that first step to ask for help and say that you need help, because the world is definitely a better place with you in it than without you. So I just want to say thank you again for inviting me, and I hope I didn't go over my time.
All right, thank you, Ricquel. Thank you for your information on there. So, yeah, I hope it didn't seem like I was tricking her, but I wanted her to see, I had this idea from a while back that if Patriot Hope wasn't working out as best as she wanted to, it's like, how can we get her to try to come up under our umbrella? Well, we have to get her to see us. So I thank all of you for just being who you are. This has been fun so far. We didn't just start at 5 o'clock today. For those of you online, we've been at this, raising some chaos in the dining room down the hall here for probably 2 days. Since Neil's been here since Tuesday, so it's been fun. I'm going to give the mic to Chris here to talk about Reboot. Did you need to set your computer up for your slides?
Yeah.
Okay. While he's getting that stuff brought over, he's going to need the HDMI cable probably up here. Yeah, if we can drag it up, or wherever you want to stand. I'm having Neil bring up something. We're having a silent auction tomorrow. Neil has brought 4 of these stone tablets. I don't know how many of you have seen them, but he's not telling us. He's not going to say what they cost to produce. But we have 4 of them, and if you would like one, you can put in a silent auction bid. We're going to read these off, not read them off, but we're going to go through them and announce who has won them tomorrow night before dinner. Nick, can you zoom in on this?
I've zoomed in as much as I can.
Can you get a good shot of it?
I'm trying. It's not easy to get up closer because it only goes so far. Let me.
Yeah, do that. Just bring it up just a bit, but put it back in the same spot.
I'm going to.
I'm sorry for the shakiness online.
Sorry.
Is that going to work?
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, it is.
Marcus?
Yes.
Those were made by a Vietnam veteran. When I told him what they were for, I know you want me online.
You don't want to be online? Okay. I'm sorry. You don't have to.
He's online now.
Well, since we're in the area, these were made by a Vietnam veteran. His name's Robert McDuffie. He married a Native American from right here in Oklahoma. He was humbled when he was asked to do these. Put something together for Point Man, and I showed him the original and our original blast, and he said, "Neil, what font?" And I said, "You're speaking Greek to me. I have no idea what you mean by a font." And he said, "Neil, how about that cross?" He says, "Can I do it in gold?" I said, "I wouldn't have it any other way." So he put these together, and as Marcus said, I don't know the cost.
Can I actually really quickly bring that up to the camera so they can get a good look at it, because it's a bit fuzzy from all the way?
No, not right now.
Okay.
We can get a better shot of it later.
All right.
It's just for show. All right, here's Chris. Thank you, sir. Right.
Sorry for the
Thank you, Marcus.
again.
Well, Marcus, do not feel bad about the chaos. Every plan does not survive first contact, so this is no different than that. And tell you what, I've learned long ago when putting together things like this, you don't want a smooth running conference. You want things to be a little chaotic so that you can enjoy it all together and see God come through for it. But yeah, my name is Chris Adsit, and I work with Reboot Recovery. I've been with them since 2017. Is that coming up okay? Yeah, good. And we actually hadn't planned on me talking about Reboot, but there was a gap in the schedule, and Marcus said, yeah, why don't you tell us a little bit about Reboot? And so I decided to go ahead and do that. Reboot actually began quite a while ago. There was a young couple by the name of Evan and Jenny Owen. Evan was basically an entrepreneur. He was a rock and roller in Nashville, and also an amazing business entrepreneur and a very strong Christian. And his wife also was a great entertainer in Nashville. Together they did things together in Nashville, and she also had a doctorate in occupational therapy. And so the two of them just really felt a burden to begin working with veterans at Fort Campbell, just up the road from them in Kentucky. And so they didn't really know what to do. They just felt like God said, okay, you need to start working with these people. And so they got a hold of the Combat Trauma Healing Manual. Some of you are familiar with this. This is something that my wife and I wrote several years ago, and we were on the staff of Crew Military. And it's for veterans that are struggling with PTSD. So they began using that and just started in their living room. And soldiers would come down from Fort Campbell. They would go through the Combat Trauma Healing Manual, and they began seeing people heal. And that was obviously quite exciting for them. And so, but one of the things that Evan is really good at is understanding communication. And he felt like the Combat Trauma Healing Manual was a little too thorough. And I got to tell you, if you wanted to go through this with a small group, and some of you may have done that, you could be a year going through it, because it really seeks to have a lot of discussion, get people talking about the trauma they've experienced, etc., which I think is really good. But on the other hand, a lot of people aren't really willing to commit themselves to a year-long program or project regarding their trauma. And so Evan and Jenny decided that they would pare that down and come up with a 12-week course that would be kind of like an on-ramp to the whole idea of faith and trauma. And so they worked on that, and they came up with the Reboot Combat Recovery course. And this is a 12-week course that addresses a lot of the key areas of need for somebody who is experiencing combat-related stress and trauma. And I heard about this, and I said, what the heck? You can't condense this down into 12 weeks. What are you talking about? And so I kind of poo-pooed the whole idea, but it didn't make me mad or anything. I just thought, whatever, if you can do it, great. Well, we happened to meet at a military ministry conference, and we began talking with each other, and they showed me what they had done, and I realized that this is great. This is what is necessary in order to get somebody into the whole idea of connecting with God for the purpose of healing from their trauma. And it's done in a group situation, which provides a tremendous number of dynamics. You've got God working directly in the lives of the individual. You've got the curriculum working. You've got the facilitator working. And you've also got each person in the group working with each other, which does a couple of things. And number one, it helps them to share their experiences in a way that's going to help somebody else, but also restores their own sense of honor, thinking, wow, I guess I do have something to offer others who are going through what I have experienced. And so all the things, all the dynamics that happen in that small group situation during that 12 weeks is an extremely effective thing. And so as my wife and I met them three times, and we talked about their vision and our vision, and realized that our visions were exactly the same. We decided to combine forces. And so we, at that time, our ministry was Branches of Valor. And so we just merged with Reboot, and we've been working with them since that time. So the whole idea with Reboot is a recognition, like it says in Proverbs 18:14. A healthy spirit conquers adversity. But what do you do when the spirit is crushed? And this, I think, describes so many of our warriors who received the greatest training on the planet and went to war and were very confident, very effective in what they did, but unfortunately wound up experiencing something that crushed their spirits. It was more than they could handle on the inside, you know, and as Ricquel was talking about, that moral injury, it was more, they had to do things that were beyond what they felt reflected their own personal convictions. And so their spirits were crushed. So what can you do about that? Well, the Bible talks about that in Psalms 34, where it says that God is near to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. It's God who's going to make that difference, and you all know that. You know, we have, with Reboot and even before that with the Combat Trauma Healing Manual, I've talked to a number of secular outfits that say, you know, this would be great, we could really popularize what you're doing there if you could just really kind of take out all the God stuff. Because some people, you know, that's offensive to them. And I always have to say, well then, if we did that, we'd have nothing to offer. We would just be the VA or something else, you know. And so, no, we never want to compromise that. Exodus 15 says, I, the Lord, am your healer. That's where the healing is going to take place. Now, all the other stuff, everything we do in Point Man, everything we do in Reboot and Crew Military and all that, that creates an environment that will give God optimal access to that person's body, soul, and spirit for the purpose of healing. You see, we create the environment, but God directly does the healing, and that's what we're looking for. We're not looking for coping mechanisms. We're not looking for chemicals that'll do a good job. We're looking for healing. And all the things that we use are important and are good, very good. We want to remove as many obstacles as we can that is keeping that person from experiencing everything that God has in mind for them. And so, this right here. You still hear me okay? I talk a little louder than Ricquel, a little deeper voice, I guess, so that works out. But the way a Reboot group looks, and I understand that Mike Bergdahl, is he here? This conference is in Indiana?
No, we'll have something that we stream tomorrow for him though.
Okay, good deal. Yeah, he apparently has really partnered the Reboot curriculum with what he does in his Point Man ministry in Indiana. And so I was thinking if he was here, I'd ask him about it. But the curriculum can be used in any kind of a situation. We've got a very strong partnership with Crew Military, and they're all over the country and in foreign countries as well. And what they do is, just as a normal part of their ministry, when they have a situation where they can get a group of people together for 12 weeks, they take them through the Reboot recovery curriculum. The idea here is 12 weeks. You get a group of anywhere from as few as 4 or 5 to as many as 18 or 20 maximum. And they meet together for 12 weeks. We always provide a meal and a bit of child care, because we want to reduce the obstacles as much as possible to keep them from coming. And so if the woman of the house realizes, hey, you know, Tuesday nights I don't have to cook, we can just show up and bring the kids and drop them off and be a part of this this group, that is attractive to her and to the man as well. And so we normally get together. We've gotten people in the community to provide meals. Sometimes it's somebody, a restaurant, a professional caterer or something, who will agree to do it for free. Or sometimes it's individuals or Sunday school groups who will say, yeah, we'll take a night. And they bring all the food in, and we eat food, and then we break up and into our groups. Whether we right now have 5 groups going in Eugene. We've got a combat recovery group. We've got 2 trauma recovery groups, which is for general trauma. And we've got an advanced group, which is kind of the next level of training I'll talk about in just a second. And so we break off into our 4 groups, but you don't have to have that many. Even if it's just one group, that's awesome. That's normally the way it works. And the session usually lasts about an hour, hour and 15 minutes to go through the course. Each person gets a field guide. They work through this field guide. There's places where They answer questions, write down observations, which they would then share later. There's homework assignments, challenges each week that they're supposed to work on between the week. And what happens then at the end, we have a kind of a big deal graduation ceremony where we give each participant a graduation certificate and a Reboot recovery graduation t-shirt. You can only wear the black Reboot t-shirt if you are a graduate. And so it's pretty big deal. We have always shared with them a verse that we feel God has laid on our hearts to share with them, either describing how they are or what God might be calling them to. And so it's you know, we don't have enough of those kind of watershed experiences where we're saying, okay, you know, you have accomplished something important, and let's move on from there. If a person was interested in going to a Reboot group, they would just go on to our main website, which is rebootrecovery.com. And on this website, it just talks about what is Reboot. Reboot for everybody, just mostly an advertisement about it. It talks about how to join up. It also gives a place where you can join a course. So let's say you wanted to join a course in Reboot Combat Recovery. It would take you to a place that would allow you to register, and they ask a number of questions that we're going to sign up and join a course, and you fill this out. And when they fill this out, it asks different things like what are you interested in going to, number of adults, how many kids, etc. And then they send it in, and it immediately goes to the facilitator. And so they get this registration, they contact the person immediately saying, hey, we just got your registration. We're gonna be starting in 2 weeks, 3 weeks, whatever. And so we're really looking forward to have you on board. So there's already contact ahead of time. And there's also a place on here where you can find out where the courses are. See it right, yeah, there it is, course locations. And so if you're wondering, is there a course somewhere, this is all the places in the country where there are courses that are operational. Right now, there are close to 300 operating courses around the country. Over the since 2015, there have been 14,000 people participate in Reboot courses around the country. And so, so they're all over the place. But these are the three main courses. The first one is Reboot Combat Recovery, which most of you would be interested in. There's the First Responder course, which is obviously for first responders. But then there's a new course that we just started here recently called Trauma Reboot. And this is the generalized trauma course, because as Ricquel says, you don't have to have been in the military or a first responder to have experienced trauma. Most people, 75% of Americans, have experienced a trauma that is strong enough to have caused PTSD. They don't all get PTSD, but they've experienced a trauma at that level. So there's a lot of stuff going on there. And so we thought, well, the principles for treating trauma are all pretty similar, so let's put together a course for the general public. And that's what Trauma Reboot is. And it's the fastest growing of all the different courses. And we have found that actually a lot of people who have experienced combat trauma or first responder trauma respond very well to the Trauma Reboot course if they go there first. And so we're actually beginning to recommend to a lot of people, go through, you know, you're somebody, you're a Marine who went to Desert Storm, you've got some PTSD, go through the Trauma Reboot course first, you and your wife, and then next rotation, go through the Combat Recovery course. And so if you do that, it winds up really, I think, solidifying the things that you can learn with regards to trauma. One of the things we're also finding out about the Trauma Reboot course is that it seems to work very well if we have a course for ladies only and a course for men only. Because a lot of times, you know, a big part of what the Trauma Reboot course facilitates is sharing your trauma, what happened to you. And a lot of times, husband and wives don't like to talk about that. Sometimes the trauma they've experienced is because of their spouse. And so they don't want to talk about that in front of their spouse. And so we get them in a ladies-only trauma reboot course, and it's an opportunity to open up, and we've experienced tremendous success with them doing that. Now, if a person becomes a leader of a reboot course, they are able to get what's called a leader membership, where you can go here. Let's say we've got the combat recovery course. You can access every course actually revolves around a video of some sort. For most of them, a great deal of content is video delivered. Not as much in the combat recovery group, but there is a video there as well. And so, so we have access to a video, and so each week, here's the first week that you would access as a leader. And let's see what we got. Course content. Start, of course. Technology. It's my favorite swear word. What? Yeah, here it comes. So, like, for the combat veterans, I'll play just a minute or so of this. You got 4 combat veterans sitting around talking about their experiences, which is going to be relevant for what you talk about during that particular day. So,
when I first came to Reboot, I thought I was coming to just another support group.
You show up, you don't really know anybody, then they look at you and they're just like, just tell us your problems. It's like, I don't even know you.
My wife brought it to me and said, you need to go to this. And I was a little hesitant at first, and I said, well, I've been to all these groups, they're all the same.
Hi, my name's Matt. I suffer from PTSD.
Being so used to the way the VA was doing things, it was a whole other world. And there's definitely a quiet branching going in.
I thought I was going to experience something that was boring, stupid, and just something I did not want to do, just like every other group I'd been to before.
It wasn't on my mind. It was something I was forced into. I thought it was going to be a Bible study. That's what I was anticipating, but it turned out to be a whole lot more.
When I first walked into Reboot, I thought I was walking into just another stupid program. But what I...
Yeah, so you get the idea. This one is, I think, more of a introductory tape about Reboot, but the other ones get into some of the nitty-gritty of things these guys experienced while they were deployed and how that relates to what they were going to talk about on that particular day. So, and then there is one other thing about this one. There are additional courses and life guides available, just a ton of videos and articles and things like that. One of the things I think is really important is this Reboot Advanced. This is a course that I put together, and it's basically phase 2. Once you've gone through a basic Reboot course, if you didn't want to jump right into the Combat Trauma Healing Manual after that, this is a 12-week course which teaches a person how to be a disciple of Jesus Christ in the context of healing from their trauma. And so it hits a lot of the basic elements of being a disciple, but in that context, and help them to understand, okay, so why in the world, first of all, how do I know for sure that the Bible is the Word of God, and how is that going to help me with my trauma? And what do I pray about? How is prayer going to help me? And those kinds of things. So it's basic, but it's very specific and applicable. So, so basically, I'll just end it here. But if anybody is interested in seeing about this, this is not meant to, by any means, supplant Point Man. It's meant to be an additional resource for any of you that when you get together at your outposts and you want something that's going to provide some cadence and some rhythm and some content as your guys get together. That maybe, I don't know, if you don't feel like that's there yet, this might be a useful tool to try to generate that. So thank you very much for listening, and we'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Chris. I'm really happy that he's able to join us here for this. Even though this last thing that he just talked about wasn't in the plans, but like I said, things didn't work out exactly like we wanted to. So I'm glad that we got a chance to learn a little bit more about Reboot before tomorrow. We brought in my friend and my personal therapist from the Oklahoma City Vet Center. His name is Billy Grimes. He's been wandering around you guys for a couple of days too, and he's got some stuff that he'd like to talk about. He's been working on this show for a little bit, and I know he came and met you guys, and I believe maybe he had to go and rewrite some of it after he met and interacted with y'all. But yeah, here's Billy Grimes, and he's going to be our last speaker of the night, so we can get some food after this.
Can you guys hear me okay in the back? Yeah, awesome. So, well, first off, I want to thank you from comrade to comrade, military family member to military family member. One of the reasons I wanted to come here tonight is because I really love putting God into therapy. And I really love putting God into therapy, or allowing some way for God to really be acknowledged as a part of therapy. And I hope to be a part of this organization as well in order to help facilitate those things in a way that the VA does not usually. So I'll tell you a little bit about myself. So I grew up in Enid. Grandparents were all combat veterans. I had one grandparent that was an Army veteran, then an Army Air Corps veteran, then an Air Force veteran, and fought in 2 world wars. So that was kind of interesting. My dad was a fighter pilot in Nam in Korea. Almost all the men but one in my family, or 2 in my family served, and one couldn't for legal reasons, and the other couldn't because of disability. But our family grew up loving the military and being very patriotic in what we do. So I'm blessed to still be here. I got 5 grandbabies, a 6th one on the way. I live in Enid. That's about an hour and 50 minutes, 2 hours, depending upon how you drive it. Sometimes I drive it faster than that. But when I joined in high school, I joined a split option program, and I was an Army reservist. So I went to Fort Benning, Harmony Church, and Echo 22, and went through infantry school. And I was kind of young and dumb, so I had some broken service. I had around 3.5 years or so of Army time in the reserves. And then I met my wife, and I was out for a while. And then I finally realized, well, man, I need to grow up. I'm gonna have a family. I gotta do something that's gonna help me, help my family, and find a way to still serve. So I joined the Navy. And that was interesting because I had signed active duty to go back into the Army on active duty status, and Navy recruiter caught a hold of me. And he was very fancy. But he gave me a line that I love and I still work for today, although it didn't pan out. He said, essentially, that the Navy has gone more than anybody, so they have great family services. And so I was hoping that that was going to be the way it worked. It didn't always work out that way, but I still work today to try to do everything I can for the military family. After I got out of the Navy in 2000, when I went through the Persian Gulf, I decided to become a national service officer. Did that for about 5 years. Then I was a vocational rehabilitation and an employment counselor, and for those who couldn't work, I was an independent living counselor. Did that for about 5 years while I still went to school and got more postgraduate training. And then for the last 12, 13 years, I've been at the Oklahoma City Vet Center under what we call readjustment counseling services. I'll take just a minute to tell you about it, because most of you in here are from Vietnam combat zones. So essentially, I think most of us here don't like traditional VA approaches that are manualized, and they're not necessarily driven all the time by our feedback. That was true when the Oklahoma City Vet Center and other vet centers were actually founded. And so they didn't have a diagnosis. They didn't know what to do. They said, here guys, go talk to yourselves. And then later, they had to come back and say, hey, we got diagnosis now. We got counselors now. And combat veterans is like, no thanks. That's okay. They ended up negotiating it out through veteran service organizations and Congress to be able to keep the readjustment counseling service, but they required that counselors are either a combat veteran or a dependent of a combat veteran. And so, just to tell you a little bit a little bit about the readjustment counseling service. They're 4% of the Veteran Health Administration budget. They're regulated with a little bit different level of privacy in that the VBA, the DOD, and the VA hospital cannot see the records. So you have a level of privacy that is great. So it's one of the things I love about the current organization that I work for. So I didn't come here though as a VA employee. I came here as a person, so I'm not talking on behalf of them, but I wanted to give you some context. So essentially I wanted to talk a little bit about PTSD, suicide, and faith. And that was what Marcus had asked me to do, so that's what I'm going to cover. So if you would go ahead and change the slide. So you're missing one. You're missing the PTSD slide. There. A little hard to read. I should have looked at that before I got in here. It is true. I did these slides in about 2 hours before we got here because I had a big PowerPoint presentation with statistics and research and references, and I found out real quick after I got here that wasn't what was needed. So I wanted to tell you a little bit about the criteria of PTSD. There is a lot of stigma about PTSD. PTSD only requires 6 symptoms. That's it. Pretty simple. Most people don't know that. If I go through the hospital and I ask a lot of providers, they won't know that. If you look at the criteria, it's just 6 symptoms. So essentially you're going to have something that could kill or injure you, or could sexually possibly penetrate you in a way that is violent. There's 4 ways for that to have happened to be counted as a stressor. Right? You can be there directly, you can witness it. You can witness it indirectly as well, or learn about it later. And then you can also be exposed to the possibility of those things on a regular basis. So for combat veterans, being there directly, witnessing it, learning about it on after-action reports or in briefings is always an issue, and then you're always around it. So I wanted to make sure that you see that that is traditionally what has to be validated in order to get service connected. After that, you only need 6 symptoms. You need 1 intrusive thought or feeling or sensation. Just 1. So I list some of them here: memories, flashbacks, dreams, nightmares, excessive distress. A flashback, unlike a lot of people think, can just take a microsecond. It doesn't have to be something that's a 10-yard stare and a 5-minute wait. Any dissociation at all can qualify there. You only have to have 1. Avoidance. I don't like it, so I avoid it. I avoid anything about it. People, places, things, objects, sounds, smells, tastes, feelings, thoughts, situations and circumstances where I might not like to have to respond to somebody, especially situations we don't control. You only have to have 1. Feeling and thinking. They call it cognitive and mood in the actual DSM-5, but basically feeling and thinking things. You only have to have 2 of these, all right? Poor memory, distorted beliefs, distrust, blame, negative emotions, such as fear, horror, shame, helplessness, a loss of interest, feeling detached, inability to be positive, or to accept and appreciate positivity. You only had to have 2. Arousal and reaction. So this is sort of a body-mind thing. Arousal is about everything emotional that's happening anywhere that energy is in motion in your body. We call that arousal. It's a little different than anticipation. Anticipation by itself is just a thought. It's a cognitive exercise of trying to anticipate what's happening. The reason I'm going to point that in is, you talked about moral injury earlier. Moral injury includes all of these things except for arousal and reaction. PTSD can include moral injury. Moral injury by itself does not include the arousal. Right? That's the reason that they're supposedly separate. And I have seen people denied when they had post-traumatic stress disorder because they weren't adequately asked questions about how they were aroused. And then they were diagnosed with moral injury. When they come to see me and we actually go through the bread and the meat and potatoes about what they actually go through, you find out they actually had post-traumatic stress disorder. But there is a difference between PTSD and moral injury, and that is arousal. You only have to have 2 of those symptoms: hypervigilance, irritability, and anger, startle in an exaggerated fashion, especially if you didn't anticipate it, poor concentration, self-destruction, doing things that just aren't safe or healthy for you. Only 6 symptoms. So I wanted to make sure people knew, because there's a lot of stigma, and a lot of people here have PTSD as a diagnosis. Right? I want you to also notice the fact that if you don't avoid it, you don't meet criteria no more. One of the things that's going to be talked about in the Bible is giving it to Jesus and letting it go. Letting God handle the things that are no longer your bag. They're no longer your bag because they're not time relevant now, except for the experience that you keep holding on to and the thoughts and feelings that you keep reacting to when you get triggered. If you give those reactions to Jesus, and you can train yourself to do that and become responsive, you have the ability to respond instead of just react, because it was given to you by the Maker.
That's right.
And so it is possible for people to heal, or at least no longer meet criteria. Now that doesn't mean that you might not meet it later, but in general, that's the criteria for PTSD. So I wanted to make sure that you knew that. Just this year, the World Health Organization added a complex PTSD. And because I made the slide a little bit dark, I'm gonna make sure I get over here to it. So the International Classification of Diseases added a self-organization disturbance, and it describes it as excessive emotional, basically distraction that keeps you from doing what you gotta do. And so I wanted people to know that worldwide, there is a new classification. Also, there is going to be a new diagnostic criteria at some point in the DSM-5. And so when that starts happening, I encourage anybody who would like to put your influence in, because you always get asked what you think. And the problem is they don't call you on the phone and tell you. You have to kind of look out for it and get on the internet and find out when those meetings are being held. And in a couple of years, you'll have another diagnostic criteria. Go ahead. All right, this is a rating schedule. And the reason I'm going to mention it is because people do get well, they do get better. At the same time, some of you guys might actually meet criteria you're not rated for. You might be rated wrongly. And I would feel remiss if I didn't at least give you the 50 and 70% criteria. So in a nutshell, if occasionally you have issues, but it doesn't really bother you, it's a 0. If it bothers you in a fairly significant manner and you take medication and or take medication, it's 10%. At 30%, there's 6 symptoms that have to do basically with mood and energy. And then you get to where most people are, 50 and 70%. There's 9 symptoms in each category. To fit the slide, I changed them a little bit, but there's 9 symptoms. You get to count 70% symptoms for 50% because it's higher. So you would have 18 symptoms to meet. You only have to meet 5 of them because you have to meet the majority. So for 50%, you would have to meet 5 of the 9, and you can include any of the 5 at 70% in order to meet 50. So that would be a flat affect. Somebody doesn't know what you got going on inside. Your face doesn't match your mood or your attitude. Next thing you know, they're starting to ask you what's going on. Why are you mad? Don't you care? And you're sitting there squashing every emotion and every thought you can and every impulse you have because you're afraid you might not use it well. So that's a big issue in families because communication is critical to get along. And so it's a big issue to be able to handle. And I encourage people to look at yourself in the mirror. God gave you that body, and you probably never look at it and practice using it. And probably do not know what you look like to other people or how you come across. So it's funny to try to do it. I encourage you. Try to do it. It's not always comfortable though. Superficial speech, talking around the bush, circumstantial stuff. It's a little different than a 70% communication problem where you talk about things that are irrelevant, where you change the relevance in order to avoid the topic. Right. Poor memory. I like things very simple and concrete, don't want to deal with complex stuff or a large sequential list of things to do and steps that you got to follow. Just give it to me simple. Weekly panic. Poor abstraction. We kind of turn off and we kind of stop trying to think. So why would we be able to abstract? Why would we remember if we're not actually wanting to? And we practice doing anything else but that. So it makes a lot of sense, and that's a part of the avoidance factor. Some people, at the ages that a lot of people are in this room, believe that they may be getting older and getting old-timers diseases, when in actuality, for a long time, you've been practicing not using your memory. Difficulty maintaining ineffective relationships. That's a little bit different than an inability, which is a 70% symptom. So, but that's your 50%. You only have to meet 5 of them. 70% symptoms. You have to meet 5 of these. Suicidal ideation. If you notice the ION on the end of it, it's an action. It's a process. You're in the process of thinking about a suicidal thing. It doesn't mean you finish the process. It doesn't mean you want to. It doesn't mean you intend to. It doesn't mean you plan to. A lot of people will have a weird kind of dissociation in order to not finish a thought, but it is still a suicidal ideation, even if the idea is not complete. And I see a lot of times where people get robbed of that idea. I also see a lot of times where people continue to not mention the fact that they're trying to think about a way out of how they feel. The desire to escape what's going on in the moment. Man, Calgon, take me away. I just need a break today. Give me a chance. Can't you just leave me alone? We don't know how to process that stuff well. It ends up feeling like, acting like, seeming like it's suicidal ideation, which is frustrating because you're sitting there telling me, I don't want to, I don't intend to. And for Christians that don't understand how the body works, that causes a big dilemma, causes a lot of shame inside and a lot of guilt. And it's an unforgivable sin in a lot of Christians' minds to even have the thought. So for your organization to be here the way it is, so that you can work with your own comrades and talk about things in a Christian manner, I'm glad you're here and I hope to be a part. And that's one of the issues that I think is an important issue to be able to cover. And I hope in your programs with Reboot that you guys cover those sorts of dilemmas as well. And I know in families, that's a big issue because you don't want to mention it to your partner because your partner's going to be afraid of you. Most of the time when guys go into the hospital, they don't want to tell a provider that they have a suicidal idea that's even in the works because they're afraid they're going to get Section 8'd upstairs and go to the 8th ward. But that's not the case. So anyway, just wanted to mention it. A long time on suicidal ideation, but it's an important issue. And that's why people are talking about it. Obsessive rituals. Now a ritual is like a magical thing. You do it in a certain way every time. And if you do it that way, then you feel safe. When we start having problems, the magic wears off, you got to do it again. I had to drive around the house twice today. I had a guy tell me the other day, instead of just once. You know, but you'll have people that walk in and out of rooms in a certain way. They'll close out their windows and doors in a certain way. When they go to the restaurant, they're going to have a certain process in their head. And they're going to go through that sequence every single time. I know for me, I walk in, is this place safe? Who can I rely on? Who am I going to be able to use as a helper, or who's got my back? Who's the guy I got to put down? Who's the ones I got to kick out of the way because I'm saving them while I'm fighting off somebody that comes in? Everybody else don't think like that in a matter of a couple of seconds. But we do. If you do it in a certain way, that's what matters. If you do it, you have to make yourself feel a certain way afterwards. That's what matters. If you can't reproduce that, the sequence, the magic doesn't work, then you have to repeat it again. And that's very obsessive. The compulsion is you have to constantly produce a sense of safety by the steps that you follow. And so that's an interesting thing. A lot of times people don't explain that. But that's what makes the obsessive ritual something important. Continuous depression. I find most people aren't continuously panicking, even though they feel like they're always on the edge. find a lot of people that if they don't physically and emotionally feel depressed most of the time, they're spending most of their time as a function, depressing, suppressing, repressing, being able to avoid and distract and dissociate and detach, which is a part of it. It's just people don't think about it like that. So I wanted to be able to make sure that I mentioned it. Depression is not just a mood or a feeling. It's also a defense function. When we do it inside, that counts. Most providers don't look at it that way. We have a society that doesn't talk about it that way. But if you own the ethics on how you think, then when you start changing how you think, you will stop suppressing, depressing, repressing. You will stop avoiding. You will start engaging, and you will start using trust and faith, and you will start healing. When it comes to speech, I mentioned earlier, illogical or irrelevant speech. I love the example that Michael Jordan's the best ball player on the planet. It's not relevant because he don't play. So if I bring it up because I don't want to talk about the king, I'm not a big fan of the king. I'd rather talk about Jordan. Well, if we were talking about things that weren't basketball stars, and they were about things that were important to me, I'd find a way to change the relevance to get out of that conversation. So if you talk around the bush, if you avoid things, if you use acronyms and all that to be smartest man in the room, or if you start trying to change the relevance or the logic attached to stuff so you don't have to talk about it, it's a 70% symptom. And you can do it very well. Everybody think you're smart and bright, it's still a 70% symptom. It's still avoidance. Inability to maintain an effective relationship, usually it has a lot to do with impulsive issues, controlling your impulses, and at the same time not communicating well what you're trying to avoid. And then the inability to handle distress, that's the arousal that's really attached to the stuff you anticipate. Okay, there's a lot here. I won't take as long on it, but we talked about moral injury a little bit. Earlier she gave the definition. I talked about it a little bit in telling you how PTSD was diagnosed, but I'll just kind of reiterate real quick. There's 9 most common things that go along with moral injury. It's about an act of commission, something you did that was abhorrent, or something you didn't do that might have saved the day or stopped it from happening. The commission and omission are very big things, and you can see the example there. If you feel like you're a failure from stopping it, or you feel like you caused it, or if you feel guilty by affiliation, which almost everybody with moral injury that I talk to does, that's a big issue. Betrayal. I got so many guys that feel like the chains of command or their government betrayed them. It was a big, huge issue when the planes went out of Afghanistan this year. It reminded a lot of my Vietnam veterans of helicopters flying out with the CIA on it. Being abandoned is one thing, being betrayed is another. So it's a huge issue, and I can't tell you how many hundreds of guys I've had tell me that betrayal was a big thing. And it didn't matter if it was at a low level or a high level, or if it was 25 years later and they found out the truth about where and why they went and that they were misused politically in a way that was not accurate and was totally misled. And we see a lot of that today. That's part of the reason we don't have any recruits right now. We have a hard time in recruiting people to join the military right now as a result of that. Guilt, distress and remorse, grief, loss, shame, disgust, inability to forgive. Now I got a saying I like to use, and it's, if you can forgive something and take a break for just a minute, you might be able to turn from the past and move towards the future so you can give for something else. But if you can't forgive the past, well, you got to continue to carry it with you into the future. Your right now is messed up, and your tomorrow is messed up. You've got to be able to forgive in order to give for. And when you need to find meaning internally, that's a very big intrinsic sense of purpose issue. And a lot of people don't own that. Inability to forgive is huge. Spiritual distress. One of the reasons I love the fact that your organization exists. Not everything that is spiritual has to do necessarily with God and Jesus in a Christian form. I talk to people who have all sorts of belief systems. I talk to people who want to name their own belief systems. But a sense of higher power, understanding a sense of creator or creation is very important to almost everybody that I talk to. And it describes it pretty well here in the sentence. For example, an individual with moral injury may have difficulty understanding how one's beliefs in relationship with the higher power can be true, given the horrific things that happen. And they question, how would my creator, how would God, how would Jesus allow this? And they feel betrayed by God. And that's a big, huge moral injury. And it's one that this organization and each and every one of you as Christians can help make a difference in people's lives. Because once they can overcome that gap, then they can really start healing. Another distress involves killing psychology. I've had guys who love killing the enemy. They don't love killing people, but they love killing the enemy. They don't feel sad about it, ashamed about it. It was their job. They feel like they should be named heroes. And especially my guys in Vietnam feel like they got treated the exact opposite. Grew up watching heroes in front of the movies that they would go to in the theater, only to come back and find out the world changed while they were gone, and then get treated terribly. There is a time for everything, and there's a time to kill. And if you got to choose between you and somebody else, or you and who's going to take your family, or the effects of future generations, which is highly discussed in the Old Testament, there's times when killing is acceptable, mandated, and it's better in the long run in your relationship with God. Very few people ever talk about that. You rarely hear that in church. Matter of fact, not long ago, I had a pastor actually tell a story on the stage, and he was talking about how basically David was forgiven, but his children were not. So I went back up there afterwards and I said, hey, there's nothing in the New Testament that shows the justification Jesus gives for the person, or the sanctification and the commitment that comes along with being a disciple that is now clean and unencumbered from all of that trauma. And this is a Christian church. It's not an Old Testament church. You can't skip half the deal and have my guys sitting out in the audience afraid to be forgiven for the sins of their fathers, and they are now the father. So that's an interesting ideal. I don't know how much you guys talk about that, but I did want to bring that up. So church pew ethics is different than warrior ethics. Society may have its own ideas. They ain't had to be there. Privilege for them because of us, they don't have to be there. God bless every one of you. And I appreciate your service, and I appreciate mine even more today than I would have understood when I served. We never view ourselves, others, the world the same again. It's all different. It's unfair. It's unfair that it's actually not the same, that it's different. It's unexpected, and the military never prepares you for any of it. Once you're out, and that's it. There are yellow ribbon programs and things like that today. I shouldn't say nobody. Rarely do people answer them honestly. They're ready to get home. And if they're going to stay in a unit, or they're going to be promoted, or they're going to go to a school or get activated, they're not going to say anything. So we have a lot of work to do on what happens while they're in the military to prepare them to get out. I do not hear or see enough stuff about that happening. The Journal of Clinical Psychology talks about the cost, and so they have finally reconciled a lot of the budget stuff. Notice the money here, $232 billion spent just in 2018 on PTSD by itself. I wanted to point out a couple things. So when they accounted it, 82% of that cost was due to civilians. Of course, there's 3 times as many of them, right? But here's the nut. Even though the military was only 18%, it was a third less. $25,000 each. Why does it cost $7,000 more for a military veteran to get treated?
Issues are deeper.
Definitely, that's part of it. Some of that may have to do with the government as well. Some of that may have to do with the fact that they're not able to attend consistently. Especially if they're still in the military, they're still being triggered and queued. What I did notice here is they did not give a separate accounting for veterans. And you can read through a variety of reports and not get the same answer when you look at how GSA accounts for veteran expenditures. The other thing I wanted to highlight was sexual assault in females. So 66, 2/3 to 3/4, that's 74%, were females. And that was pretty true as far as the ratio from civilian to militaries. But in the civilian sector, it was by far the largest PTSD expense. So there's a whole lot of inappropriate sexual behavior going on out there that's reported in medical records, but ain't necessarily found and reported in the news or dealt with on a social platform as far as policing. Okay, this is suicide report. So, the key findings, 2020, 580 members died by suicide. That was an increase of 9% since 2015. There were 200 spouses that died. Majority of service members' suicide deaths died by firearms. It was about 65% to 79%, depending. When you get to 2021, second quarter, 99. That was an increase of 18 from that quarter compared to the previous quarter. National Guard, 26. Reserves, 14. Those increased by 18 compared to the previous quarter, or that previous year, same quarter previous year. 2022, 70 active duty, 18 reserve, and 20 National Guard. That was as of June. But again, they're not counting veterans. So I can't compare that. I couldn't find accurate information anyway. So they got some programs that they report that they're working on. We've heard more talked about today than what's actually there, but that's what was published on the DSPO site. So I wanted to make sure you at least got a touch of that. The APA, American Psychiatric Association, they got clinical guidelines. So I wanted to describe some brief forms of treatment, and Marcus had asked me to do that. So cognitive behavioral therapy has to do with thinking and behavior, and being able to match and align those things in a manner that's hopefully accurate, based on evidence. You're not acting because inside you're thinking about something else, and you're deluded or hallucinating and psychotic, and it don't match. So the goal would be to align thinking and behavior in a way that they're congruent, they make sense. One is legitimately reasonable to cause the other. And that practice has been around for a long time. So we're looking at changing patterns, either in thinking or in how we act. Brief electric psychotherapy, basically you combine a bunch of that stuff. There's all different kinds of best practices that are trying to be developed and have been around for a long time. But prolonged exposure, it's a best practice according to the APA, and also one of the 4 main best practices in the VA. Basically, we're going to expose you to something that may be a little more gradual or a little more intense, but expose you until you get used to it. When you're used to it, you don't react to it as much. I don't know if I call that therapy, but at the same time, it works. So, emotional processing due to exposure. Try to make sense of the trauma. You can imagine it. You can write about it. You can actually physically step into real situations, or you can do it virtual on computers and things like that now. And there's a lot of virtual reality out there for prolonged exposure. Cognitive processing. It's kind of renaming the same thing that comes along with a lot of cognitive work. But you work through your beliefs, right? And it deals with a lot of the cardinal symptoms in PTSD. So guilt, shame, betrayal, trust, and forgiveness. And those things are also cardinal symptoms for moral injury. Eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. It's called EMDR. So it's kind of fancy. Some of you may not have heard about it. At the same time, it's kind of important to discuss. So the way the brain and the eyes work together is a part of what happens. So being able to imagine something and then reprocess it in a way that's safe is one of the things that goes on. At the same time, they're going to try to get you to focus on something else, and they call that bilateral stimulation. So part of you is focused here, part of you is still there. And so anyway, what they found is a lot of times people can resolve symptoms without having to actually know how or why it happened. So it's one of the best practices. Written exposure therapy, you write it out, it's pretty basic. They got people now that are actually trying to say that their research proves that in 5 sessions, they can get just as much done if they do it in a decent manner and the person's really wanting to access what it is they're writing about. They can achieve the same amount of success as EMDR, prolonged exposure, cognitive processing therapy, and things of that nature. So it's definitely something that's not likely to go away. When it first came out, it was not performed well. It was viewed as a exposure people didn't want and a pressure people didn't want. And they were taking somebody that was dysthymic, couldn't express themselves, didn't have words for some things, and then ask them to do something. Doesn't necessarily work out. 74% of the veterans, that were combat veterans coming out of Vietnam, had alexithymia. It's a fancy term to say that. You have a hard time putting your words or your emotions and your expressions and stuff in a way that makes sense. They are trying to figure out a way that improves that and gives people more time. So I don't know if I'll buy the 5 weeks, but the Texas Health San Antonio Strong Star Consortium is the agency that's researching that. And they also are one of the major consortiums that all the best practices are funded through, as well as they promulgate training through most of the colleges. And so a lot of the stuff that we do in the government is funded through this organization. I'm talking too long, the computer's tired of me. Person-centered therapy, just focus on your, the therapist is supposed to help focus on your needs, your perceptions, what you want, not on them and not what the system wants. We sure need a lot of that in the VA. So other than that, medications. There's only 4 medications right now that are considered the best practice. All right, sertraline, paroxetine, fluoxetine, and venlafaxine, and several of you are on those current medications. Other than that, there's found very little efficacy in a lot of the medications that they use. Sometimes people will use Prazosin for nightmares. Really, it was a high blood pressure pill. It just happens to work better when you sleep. It'll drop you 13, 15 points on your systolic high blood pressure reading. Supposedly, it'll slow down your reaction then because you don't have as much blood pressure and force to get motivated. So you don't respond to the nightmare. It doesn't wake you up as much. But at the same time, that's about all you get out of it. So, next page. Boy, I tell you, a pilgrim. Are we good?
Yeah.
Okay, good. All right. Okay, next. All right, so these are other therapies. I'm not going to go through them all, but acceptance commitment therapy is one that they are trying to kind of almost force into a best practice. Its use for moral injury has a lot to do with acceptance of things and then the ability to commit yourself towards your goals. ACT has been used a lot for moral injury, and it matches a lot with the Christian ethic when it comes to accepting some things that you really believe and then acting like you believe them. And then, that's a big thing, especially if you can give your problems over to the Lord. Adaptive disclosure as more of an independent living sort of a approach to moral injury. Impact of killing interventions. I haven't seen that myself as far as their particular intervention, but they use narrative writing types of approaches. Guilt reduction, building strength, that's used by pastors and chaplains at times. It really focuses on forgiveness. You spoke earlier about sleep and some of the things you do to prepare for sleep. Complementary and alternative medicine, nickname is CAM, is an acronym. They do things like yoga, acupuncture, nutrition, stuff like that. Mindfulness is actually a process that's used as a misnomer. You're supposed to, even though you might be aware of something, not feed into it. It's not supposed to be full of your mind. In the East, they would say you would think of nothing. And some of my veterans would say, well, that's what I try to do every day. But anyway, mindfulness is also used. Next page. Tons of others. I won't go through them all. I will pick out a couple things though. Technology is huge. Right now we can actually take radio waves, radio frequency waves, magnetic waves, and we can actually stimulate parts of the brain and then see how the brain and the body reacted to it. They've been able to track isotopes that they've used with MRIs and PET scans and functional types of equipment and be able to see what pathways are being lit up. In China, they're actually tracking frequency emissions from the brain, which we're not doing in America. But those things are cool. One of the things I want to mention about that is that transcranial magnetic stimulation is an interesting thing. I'm going to give you an analogy. It's not exactly right, but I want you to know about it. Sometimes you'll find a guy that says, hey, cognitively, mentally, I get this, but why am I still having all these problems? Well, there's a metaphor that may work for that. If you have a beaver dam that is not made of wood, it's made of a positive and a negative ion that attracted to each other. And then they glommed up with the other positive and negative ions. And they kind of formed a big old clot and a big old beaver dam. Although the cognitive stuff went downstream, the emotional stuff that was supposed to go with it did not. So TMS is able to actually neutralize the magnetic charge in the ion channel, so those things separate, flow back downriver. And then all of a sudden people are like, hey, I don't have the same reaction I used to have. I don't even worry about whether I get it now. I used to be frustrated because I got it and I didn't feel like it, but now everything's okay, which means they didn't have to do talk therapy. They didn't have to do other medications. So anyway, TMS is something I definitely look at. There's very few people doing it in Oklahoma, but in Texas, if you look up the Strong Star Consortium or the University of Texas Health Center, you can find that there. And they are also still doing studies in a variety of different ways, as you can see. So now they're stimulating a whole lot of body parts. The one on the tongue, that one I didn't quite catch. But so anyway, there's a bunch of those that are kind of interesting. And you can see there's a lot of medications that are being used down at the bottom. There are a variety of agencies trying to do sleep-based things beyond cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia or re-scripting for nightmares. So that's kind of interesting, but you'll see the DOD and the VA now are doing a lot of telehealth stuff. They're doing a lot of apps as well. So next page. Recent findings, the National Center for PTSD. This is interesting. They found that telehealth was most acceptable and least refused. It's easier, especially in today's world where we got a lot of people that understand that. It may not be that way for me. I'm not that technologically savvy, and a lot of us in this room are old enough that we're not either. But that's an interesting thing. They blended cognitive processing therapy with it, and all of a sudden, a lot of the dropout rates went away. And the reason that's important is because cognitive processing and prolonged exposure would have a veteran go into it and 56% of them stopped. They canceled. And so now they're able to telehealth at least get down under 10%. So they're trying to see if they can get cognitive processing to work and then maybe move towards virtual or imaginal exposure and prolonged exposure. Written exposure therapy, the lowest dropout rate, that's amazing. So the Journal of Sleep Medicine. So obviously there's a whole lot of people that go into the service and then they develop sleep problems. There's a lot of reasons for that. 1, you get trained to stay awake. 2, you get punished if you don't. 3, you get trained to do things that if you fall asleep, you get dead, or your guy dies. So you learn to never allow yourself to go to sleep. One of the things about sleep that's important is rapid eye movement. You have basically a washing phase or a rinsing phase. And if you can't get into rapid eye movement, then you can't detoxify all that stuff the brain would have logically processed, biochemically processed. Its microcomputer would have processed. Doesn't get processed. Doesn't get cleaned out. It would be the same as buying the most expensive detergent in the world, putting them on your pants, running them through the washer, and then when it comes rinse time, there's no water. If you try to put those pants on, you ain't gonna wanna wear them because you've still got all that detergent on them. Well, inside the body, that analogy is still the same, except it's not detergent, it's byproducts of what the body would have gotten rid of had we finished rapid eye movement. So sleep is hugely important. What they found out was the Army's length of deployments was a huge issue. So they had a lot more problems with sleep. Everybody else was going 12 to 16 months or going 21 months. But in general, if you're afraid of a nightmare that's going to stimulate you, that's a big issue. If you're afraid you're going to die, you're not going to wake up. If you're afraid your family is going to be assaulted, those sorts of things don't make it easy. If you have a lot of pain, you have a lot of urinary issues, irritable bowel syndrome, presumed to be caused by things we're exposed to. If the head has myelin that's been ate up because of exposures and its central processing is not working right, there's all sorts of reasons why people have sleep problems. But it's a big thing, so I'm glad that you are trying to get things done here locally in Oklahoma. I appreciate that. I wanted to talk about a couple things real quick. Justification. This is a Christian organization, and it's one of the reasons I'm proud to become a part of it. In therapy, there's a big thing of nobody forgiving each other. There's also a big thing where people don't understand what forgiveness actually is. It's also a huge thing in Christianity. So justification of the past. If Jesus is Lord and Savior, if you accept Jesus as Lord and Savior and you confess your sins, that's one thing. If Jesus justifies grace on the sinner, not what the sinner did, but on the sinner, it's not the stuff that gets forgiven. It's the sinner. A lot of people don't understand that. Because they don't understand that, they can always remember what they did. They never forgive themselves, even if they believe Jesus would. So that's a huge thing. And then they also don't necessarily understand that when Jesus died on the cross, what he did was he bore everything that God would have needed to have been born for him to say, hey, you're good to go. So anyway, I think that's a couple of things that I thought were important. So God judicially forgives sins and restores righteousness without need of pardoning. So anyway, I just wanted to mention that. A lot of you may understand that, but a lot of veterans do not. So Jesus gives the ability to flip forgiveness into giving for God. And if people don't have a mission and they're Christian, they have one. Why are they ignoring it? Their mission is serving Jesus and serving God. Their mission is using the abilities that was given to them by God. So in a secular but also never talked about way, I want to mention a couple of things that are never talked about. The abilities that we are given to sense, feel, think, smell, taste, remember, experience, to have a body to use are gifts. They're rarely treated as gifts. You have the ability to sense. What you sense is not who you are. So here's a conundrum. Besides those things being ignored, what I tend to find is that people don't understand that they don't need to prove their identity. They don't have to know their identity. God made it so that you don't know your identity. Nobody does. You're born into a body. You don't know where you come from as far as being able to prove it. You don't know what happens when you really sleep. Can't prove it. When you die and your body's in the ground and whatever it is that you are goes somewhere else, you can't prove that either. People fight wars over it. People call people psychotic over it. If God wanted you to understand your identity, he'd have made it known. We're here on earth to do something different than try to prove our identity. Because the world doesn't understand that, we see people out there trying to change their identity through the only thing that they can relate to it. Their body, their thoughts, their feelings. They don't understand those are gifts. They're not your identity. You're not what you feel. I'm mad today. No, you're not. You are not mad. You may experience anger, but you're not the experience. You may think about things, but you're not the thought. You may have a feeling and sensation, but you're not the sensation. You're not what you label it. Those things don't get taught in churches. They don't get mentioned much in the Bible. But there is a difference. Your integrity is without question. And you don't even need to know it or understand it. And the fact that we keep trying to is part of the problem. So society keeps manufacturing ways to try to do that. And you'll see people talk about meism all the time, trying to define themselves, because they don't understand that you were made by the Creator. And when he put you here, he didn't bring a label on your head with who you are. He gave you a body. That's so other people can identify you, but it's so that you can actually go through life using it to experience and to think and to feel and to act and to commune with other people. It's not about your identity. So anyway, that's an interesting thing. I think at this point that makes a huge difference in whether or not people actually move towards the second phase after they get saved. It's kind of like it stops for a lot of people. Well, you have things to do and you have plenty of things that are just as integrous as they were the day you were born. The integrity of the abilities you have to think aren't jacked up because you feel like you can't, or because you're chemically overloaded and the brain grounds out thoughts, or because you get overloaded and the brain fuses thoughts to something and you can't stop thinking about it. The ability to think is not messed up. How it's being done, the means you use to go about it, is a different issue. So the integrity that your abilities are okay is something I think is important. It gets doubted too much. Sanctification right now. I talked a minute ago about the fact that you can have the past, and if you could just chill in the moment. Most people just cannot just be okay and not have to worry about nothing for a second and enjoy being in the flow. Well, in a Christian manner, right now is very important because you got to live your life towards the purpose that the Holy Spirit puts on you and that God has deemed. So the ability to find that is important. It's an important part of therapy. And it's never talked about. You're not going to find it talked about in the VA or the World Health Organization. It's not on a diagnostic code. So it's important that people like us are actually able to talk about these things, because when you look back and you see, did I do any good today? And you can't see it, it's because you didn't do it. The frequent actions that were intended for you to do to honor being here, to being forgiven, to give for God, need to be acknowledged. And that's very rarely done. So I just kind of wanted to mention that. You can see some of the verses and stuff that are there. But living the rest of your life in a manner that leads you towards glorification when you finally die is a huge thing for Christians. And a lot of times it's just not brought up. It's rarely brought up in therapy. So the last one for glorification, I wanted to talk about a quote. Persevering to live faithfully until we are received as a citizen of heaven. Philippians 3:20 and 21. Our citizenship is in heaven, from which we wait for our Savior to transform our lowly body. It's not who you are. So all the trauma that we have that goes on in our body is not who we are. And that's what most people feel like they suffer. And because they're not following Jesus or reaching for God, they're losing all the lifeblood, they're losing all the fluid, their bones are shrinking, their bones are getting arthritic, the energy is not there because there's nothing to convert it. You got to have water and blood to convert energy. Energy is a gift. It's not who you are. You don't have it. People say, I'm tired, I don't have no energy. You got plenty of energy all the way around you. It ain't yours, it's God's. You don't have energy. You have a utensil that can use it, unless your utensil is not being treated well, but it heals. But this is the way to go about getting it healed. So anyway, I just kind of wanted to make sure I mentioned that, because I appreciate the fact that Point Man Ministries is a Christian-driven organization. I'm honored to be able to be here and to talk about some of these things. Psalm 51:8, make me to hear joy and gladness, that the bones which thou hast broken may rejoice. Notions for me. I thought about what can it be that's important? What do people need to hear that are coming here today? They don't need to hear repeat, redundant information they can find on the web. What's the point? You get to commune together. You get to be together to praise God. You get to be together to praise still being here despite going to war. You get to praise yourself for being a warrior and a patriot while you did it. You get to rejoice in watching God do what God does. One of the biggest issues I find in treatment is that people are taking on something that's not their bag. I'm not accountable for what my president does. I'm not accountable for what the guy next to me did. I'm no longer accountable today for what I did back then, because I have an accounting to move forward. while I pursue God. And it's important to be able to enjoy, to relax, and not think you have to save somebody. So as a clinician, I've lost a couple of people. I've had to treat people as a corpsman. I've seen enough people die, I don't want to see no more. Wasn't my bag. Took a while for me to realize that. I can look back and see where I had detriment in my life and my relationships because I didn't understand that. I thought I had to be a superhero. So, as somebody who's able to counsel without a license, I wanted to make sure that you heard that, because you'll be consoling and counseling each other as well as new comrades and family members. Be comfortable in your own skin. It's a gift from God. Be comfortable that you don't control the choices that other people make, because they have their choice ability given to them. I have a similar ability, but it's not mine. I can't make their choice. The abilities they possess, I don't possess. I can encourage and empower somebody to use their own. That's treatment. Treatment's not about what a provider does to you. It's about what you do for yourself. And what's not your bag is very important, because I can relish watching God do the work in people that I can't do. And when I see people change, I know I didn't do that. We may have talked about it, and what I did may have helped out somehow or another, but it didn't make the change. The person owns their own choices, and it's a gift from God, because I don't have to suffer their loss. But I can sure help them try to feel better or to find a way to get through it. And organizations like this do that. Rejoice in watching God work. Rejoice in being together. Rejoice in being in your own skin and relaxed and comfortable. Take the pressure off. Let God do a lot of that work. But when it comes to owning your own, that's your bag. You know, so that kind of led us to where we are. But I was kind of thinking, what's important for people to hear today? Because it ain't me. You know, it's what you get to do. You know, it's also honoring the difference between the abilities you have, the body you have, right, and the relationship you're pursuing with Christ. So I thank you very much. Is there any questions, or has anybody got questions about things that are presented?
What have you heard about LSD therapy for PTSD?
Microdosing on LSD actually is showing a lot of benefit. It's opening up channels that were not opened up before. It's also reviving channels that chemically were never really touched. The endocannabinoid system is not a system that the government approves of, but it's one of the largest systems in the body. Marijuana itself is also being tested and used, but very sparingly. The microdosing aspect, so that you don't overdose, is very important. And a lot of people don't understand that research is being done out there. But from a naturopathic point of view, I'm not talking for the government, like I said when I first started. I'm here on my own. I'm not here as a representative. From a naturopathic point of view, you don't have to deal with all those chemistries and all those extra substances that don't actually get there. But one of the problems with regular medications is they're usually a channel blocker, or they're a voltage gate regulator, and they stop energy from getting to where it needs to go. Whereas naturopathic medications usually help reinvigorate the tissues so that they flow better. But it is happening. And it's happening in a lot of psychedelics. A lot of psychedelics are being tested now. And marijuana, the marijuana phenomenon has kind of happened, has opened up some of that. So right now it's even being tested in the VA. It's just only a couple places.
I have problems with nightmares, and a lot of times I wake up from nightmares hallucinating. And I just seen up there on the board, on the screen, about rewriting your nightmares, and that just don't make any sense to me. I'm kind of of the opinion, it's like, man, if I could rewrite this thing, I'm not going to be waking up on a nightly basis,
right?
Ever. And like Ricquel, my psychiatrist had prescribed that to me, but the problem with Ricquel is my natural blood pressure is 110 over 68, and they put me on that stuff, and I just bottomed out.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
I think just, it's a bad problem for me. How in the world do you rewire a nightmare?
Well, that's actually a very accurate question, because evidence shows, at least they think it shows, that every time you visit a dream or a memory, you contaminate it in some way. Something changes about it, because you're not at the actual time and place it actually occurred. And so when you come and touch it from some other time, some other place, that it changes it somehow or another. So there is evidence to say that you can never actually accurately rewrite it. One of the things about writing it is that the writing itself is a trigger for the brain, and it uses a lot of systems. So we have emotions going on, thoughts and feelings going on. We have sequential audio-visual systems that are on fire, and all of those things go together. Things have to be encoded, they have to be, recoded again and uploaded. So it's a very complex thing to talk about nightmares. I don't know that they have a good medication for nightmares. I'm going to tell you something that I believe. Now, this is my belief. I'm not saying this as a scientist. I'm just saying this based upon all the people that I've seen. The brain is a wonderful thing. It does lots of stuff. Lots of stuff we don't know how it works. It's just amazing. Right? But when your body, mainly your brain here, gets told to squash information, I don't want that. I don't like that idea. I don't like anything in that idea. Capture it and put it in jail. It's going to the cognitive jail. And then all the emotion that's attached to it, it's getting squashed and it's getting sent down. And what ends up happening is you do everything you can to keep it squashed. But the brain's got an automatic mode that is supposed to process stuff and to clear it out. It's supposed to be processed and put into place. It's one of the reasons that rapid eye movement is critically important. If you won't allow the enemy to get you, even in your dreams, then you're going to capture it, apprehend it. You're going to stay awake at night, not only be anxious about it, you're going to fire up your arousal. You're going to be vigilant for it. You're going to apprehend it and shut it down. If you shove too many things down, it's like overloading a capacitor, overfilling a cup. Pretty soon it has to come out if the brain is going to process it, or that part of the brain dies. Same thing with a river or a tributary. You've got to keep it flowing or stuff dies. So there's an automatic sort of inherent human body software program that says, hey, what am I going to do with this now? It's been here a long time. It's been 40 years. Why are we still holding this here? It's obvious that what's in that dream is not in this room. Why can't I let this go? The brain is going to challenge you on that. Now, it's processing it out, and if you don't wake up for it, it will just process down. Here's the problem with PTSD. We find the bad guy anytime, anywhere, even in our own skin, even when we're supposedly sleeping. Which means then you basically get constipated. All that stuff has to come out, and when it comes out now, it's not going to be pretty. When you wake up to it, you're not going to feel good about it because there's so much pressure attached to it. So one of the things that narrative therapy does about it is it helps to acknowledge it instead of deny it, and rebuke it, suppress it, repress it, and try to avoid it. So the narrative therapy is helpful. The blood pressure pill is used only to stop some of the arousal so that maybe during a sleep cycle, you're not so aroused that it wakes you up. Okay, the issue though is with PTSD, you're on the lookout for it anyway. So if there's a belief statement that says, I can't have that ever let go, I can't ever acknowledge it, I can't let it sneak out of my dreams because it's going to get me everywhere. It's a toxin, and everything about me is going to be destroyed. I have some people that believe those nightmares have lives of their own. And so in their mind, they're keeping a real life criminal that's a symbiote inside their body, a demon, from getting them. And you'll hear people talk about nightmares and PTSD and the dreams being their demons coming to haunt them. So you would need to be able to change your belief about that, restructure the way your neural pathways are working with that information. You'd have to do it frequently enough that your brain would not only build the information and build the tissue for it, so that it could connect with everything else. You know, you would also have to be able to start adding on to that belief system. You know, that means now you're using what you learned from that nightmare instead of avoiding it. You know, and so that's a big, huge issue. But that's just some personal that I believe kind of happens. So I don't know that there's any great solutions out there for nightmares. But one is reality feedback. Your nightmare is not a live body that has its own sentience standing in front of you, and it is no longer time relevant. It's not here. So if you can convince how you react to that, all right, to be more responsive and intentional instead of a reaction, you choose how you're going to respond to that. You might be able to get yourself back to sleep. You might be able to say, hey, that's okay, body. Thank you for bringing it up. I'm glad you're getting it out. So if you've ever had diarrhea, diarrhea is terrible. But after you've gone through the diarrhea, you sure feel better. If those toxins stayed inside you, you wouldn't feel good, even still. And there are some people that never let the dreams out, and they feel constipated in the mind. They feel like their brain's got all kinds of stuff, all kinds of crazy stuff going on that they can't control. So if you believe you're not supposed to have a dream about something in the past, that's actually inaccurate. Your brain can remember anything, and should. And so we actually stop an important pivotal function when you worry so much about the dream stuff or the emotions you still have for it that are out of place. And you kind of get in your own way a little bit. And so I do think that there's cognitive work that can be done that helps with that. But a lot of that has to do with faith. Because if you're afraid you're going to die because you remember it, because you feel like it's live and it's happening again, there's an element of faith that goes along with that. And reinforcement is built by frequency. We can build tissue by doing something frequently, build a habit, then the body builds tissue for it, it becomes automated, right? And so one of the things that I would look at doing is frequently trying to find ways to restructure your beliefs about the significance of that dream, the stuff that's in it, your bodily reaction and response to it, and the fears you have that are not legitimate. You lived through that war. A dream about that war is not going to kill you. But you would have to change how you thought about it, how you reacted to it, and you get to choose those responses. I'll tell you one last thing. If you try to medicate in order to stop it, alcohol, most of the drugs we use, they get in the way of rapid eye movement. So you don't ever get to finish. You might go to sleep, but you don't process sleep. And so those nightmares will stay there unless you decide intentionally to do something with it. So my acronym for faith is frequent actions intended to honor the health and well-being that is gifted to you by the fact you survived your war. And you are still here in a body that is a gift with the ability to choose of your own free will to be easy today because you gave your burdens to Christ. If you truly practice that in a manner relevant to your nightmares, I would imagine some of those nightmares will no longer be nightmares. They'd be things that might have been nightmares. There might even be things that you treasure now and look forward to when they come up in your world. Thank you. Sorry, it's so long, guys.
All right, thank you, Billy. Thank you, everybody. That's all that we have for this evening's session. It went a little bit over what I thought it was going to be. So let me say this. I know that a lot of you are hungry. Some of you still traveling in today. You don't have to eat here. You don't have to stay here. But the waitress that we dealt with last night, for those of you that were here last night, she would love for us to go and visit her, and she would love to take care of us and feed us again tonight. So, Bob, can you play Rattle? I'm gonna play one song that I think is relevant for tonight. You can get up and move around, fellowship as long as you want to, but yeah, we're gonna play this and we're gonna close for the night. And again, if you need to get up and leave, you can, while this song is playing too. I'm sure you've all heard it, but thank you guys. What we're queuing up to, there's a question that was asked to me on the itinerary that you have. I should have put lunch break, not lunch. So lunch is on your own for tomorrow. Just make sure you come back for the sessions afterwards. I apologize for that. It's okay, we can play it tomorrow.
I've got 14-minute break.
No, we'll play it tomorrow. I'm sorry, guys. I know we have some people that are hungry.
No, give me that idea. That right here.
Yeah.